Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Max Cleland, and I approve that announcement. May I say that I was out walking on the Appalachian Trail recently, and I came across some interesting figures, some of which you know, some Democratic names you know, but I also came across some other people, the governor of South Carolina, the senator from Nevada, the former senator from Utah, and a legislator from California. They were looking through the bushes. They were looking under the trees. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We're looking for family values." I want to correct one misimpression, and that is that I was wounded in Vietnam. Actually, I just went duck hunting with Dick Cheney. Welcome, all of you. Not many people know it, but had there been no President Carter that took a chance on a young former state senator who was only 34 years of age at the time and happened to have served in Vietnam, there would be no real Max Cleland event tonight. There would be no book, and there would have been no real political career. Jimmy Carter saved me from oblivion. In 1975, I was on the staff of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, put there by an old friend, Alan Cranston from California, and then the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Vance Hartke from Indiana. I had a desk, I had a pen, and I had a paper, and one phone. That was it. I was making $12,500 a year. They later upped that to $19,000. So I was in big cotton in Washington. I drove myself to work and ate in the Senate dining room downstairs where all the employees ate, and thought that that was going to be my life. Then a young man named Jimmy Carter started running for the presidency. I was in Atlanta that rainy night in January of '75 when Jimmy announced, and we all wondered, what in the hell is he doing? He ran for the presidency in 1976 at a time when the nation was grasping for something good in its character. Having survived the Watergate years of Nixon, they were looking for something better. And they found it in Jimmy Carter, his courage, his character, and his faith in his fellow man, and his faith in the United States, and his patriotism. Having served in the United States Navy for 10 years and having been a graduate of Annapolis, this man rose to the occasion. Not many people thought he could win, especially me. But as he continued to win primary after primary, I began to be elated. By the summer of 1976, Alan Cranston called me and said, "I think you ought to be head of the Veterans Administration." I said, "You've got to be kidding, sir." He said, "I think Jimmy Carter's going to win, and I think you ought to be head of the VA." That summer in August of 1976, Jimmy Carter spoke to the American Legion out in Seattle. There was Alan Cranston. And by that time, Carter had won the Democratic nomination. And I went in through the ropes to see him. He gave me a big hug. Afterwards, Alan Cranston said, "I only need a couple of things from you when you win. One of them is to make Max Cleland head of the VA." And Jimmy Carter said, "I love Max Cleland." So Jimmy Carter wins, and on March 2nd, 1977, Jimmy Carter called me into the Oval Office and swore me in as head of the Veterans Administration. I was 34. The only thing that I had commanded up to that point had been a platoon in Vietnam. Beyond that, I really had no, quote, executive experience. At that time, the Veterans Administration was bigger than 5 cabinet-level departments combined. And we, of course, had the Veterans from Vietnam descending on us by the millions. Well, with Carter's help, we put together something called post-traumatic stress disorder, 1978. The psychiatry department in the VA finally admitted there was something after war, PTSD, something called, I call post-war trauma, which you suffer from for the rest of your life, but it is possible to deal with it and overcome it. In 1980, we put together, with Jimmy Carter's help, something called the Vet Center program, brand new, a counseling model outside the VA hospital system to deal with the emotional aftermath of war. I still look at the Vet Center program today as the finest accomplishment of my time in public life. Of course, Jimmy Carter lost in 1980, and I was unemployed again. So I came home to Georgia, but thank God, due to those years, I was elected Secretary of State for 12 years, and then when Sam Nunn stepped aside, I ran for the Senate. 2002 was a terrifying year for Georgia. By that time, George Bush was already ensconced in the White House. He was 68% popular in Georgia, and Karl Rove came down and handpicked my opposition. Ralph Reed, whose name has since been properly disgraced, was head of the Republican Party at the time. And with Governor Barnes taking the Confederate emblem off the state flag, that cinched our fate. We all were beaten. I was beaten, the governor was beaten, the speaker was beaten, and many members of the House and Senate lost their seats. So there was a terrifying time for Georgians. For myself, I went down like a rock. I had been in public life, been in public service, and it had been meaningful and powerful for me. It had helped me overcome the grievous wounds of literally almost dying in Vietnam, and my name being on that wall up in Washington among the 58,000 dead from that era. But I made it back. And so public service and public life became my way of coping. Without it, I went down. I wound up in Walter Reed 40 years later with all the emotional grief and aftermath that war could produce and political loss that could produce. And I went to counseling for years there. And in many ways, I'm still in touch with a lot of those people. Now, President Obama has given me a chance to serve again. June 3rd of this year, just before the 65th anniversary of the invasion at Normandy, I met President Obama in Normandy, and he made me head of the American Battle Monuments Commission. So my heart goes out to another president who saves my rear end at a time when I needed it to be saved, and gives me a chance to continue to serve my fellow men and women, especially those who have served. So that's basically the story of the book, the good, the bad, and the ugly of a young man from Lithonia, Georgia, who was fortunate enough to have a father that paid his way down at a little school called Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. It is highly unusual, I think, for someone to come before you as an author who is a graduate of remedial English in college. I'm not sure how that computes. I went to Stetson, and I failed the writing sample and the grammar sample. So I wound up in remedial English. It was 5 8 o'clock classes. We were on a semester program. So it was 5 8 o'clock classes every week for an entire semester, 4.5 months. But in that crash course, in that boot camp on the English language, I improved more than anyone else in the class. I still remember it. You know, you don't forget those kind of things. I improved 26 points on the grammar sample. Praise the Lord. And I started getting A's and A+s on my 500-word themes, where I would spend all day on a 500-word